A woman looked up while smoking a cigarette, only to see an incredible sight. Numerous fighter jets were streaking across the sky in an eerie formation.
All of them kind of parallel like that?
But her friend paid her no attention at all. Unexpectedly, the next second,
Shit!
the woman rushed forward to check on her, but by then, the driver had already fallen unconscious.
Helen, stop looking at the goddamn Helen?
The woman remembered there were still people in the bar, so she immediately turned around and rushed in to ask for help, only to be shocked by the scene before her eyes. Everyone in the bar was convulsing in a strange manner. There wasn't a single person who could help. The female writer named Carol was terrified. Carol fought down her fear and dialed the emergency number, but the police station had also fallen, and only a cold automated voice answered her call. Carol had to take Helen to the hospital by herself, but she suddenly remembered that her car was equipped with an alcohol detection device. The car wouldn't start if the driver had been drinking. She had just had a few drinks at the bar not long ago. Carol had to get out of the car in frustration. Just then, she suddenly remembered the car that had been in the accident earlier. Carol moved the driver to the passenger seat, then she carried Helen into the car. Only then did she hurry to drive to the hospital, but when she arrived at her destination, Carol realized that the hospital had also fallen long ago. Everyone was convulsing in that same strange way. At this point, Carol's heart was filled with panic and despair. She tried to wake up one of the doctors, but no matter how Carol shouted, the doctor didn't respond at all. Just as Carol was about to leave again, everyone regained consciousness at the same time, including Helen on the stretcher, but she had just said hello to Carol. When she stopped breathing completely, Carol hurried to stop a doctor, wanting her to resuscitate Helen, but the next second, everyone turned to stare at Carol in unison. Their stares made Carol's hair stand on end. Before she could figure out what was going on, she saw someone carrying Helen's body away. Carol rushed forward to stop them.
What the hell is wrong with you people?
We just want to help, Carol.
Though their tone was sincere, their perfectly synchronized voices and identical gazes filled Carol with terror. She fled the hospital in a panic, planning to tell others about the strangeness there. But when she finally spotted another group of people, she found that they were also staring at her intently. They looked exactly like the people in the hospital. Carol didn't dare to linger and hurried to drive away, and those people didn't try to stop her. They just watched for a moment, before going back to repairing the city. Everything looked perfectly normal, but only Carol knew that these people were the biggest abnormality of all. Not long after, she returned home only to find that she had lost her keys. Carol was about to smash the lock with a stone. Just then, a man and a woman suddenly walked over from the side. They still spoke in that perfectly synchronized way. Carol hastily told them to step back and raised the stone to show she meant business. But the two said they only wanted to help her. They also reminded her that there was a spare key under the flower pot on the right. But even Carol herself had no idea about this. She had no clue how these two people could have known that. As she watched the two leave, Carol's expression grew more and more grim. Just then, the neighbors all came out of their houses one after another, and they seemed to be gathering toward Carol's house. She had no time to think and rushed inside, locking the door tightly behind her. Carol carefully peered out through the window. She saw that the neighbors were actually getting into their cars and driving away. A moment later, a van drove into the neighborhood. The remaining neighbors helped load the bodies into the van. If nothing else, they had met the same fate as Helen. It was as if the neighbors knew Carol was watching them. They even turned around and waved at her. This made Carol even more terrified. She tried to find out what was going on from the news, but all the channels had no signal. The only channel that worked was filled with strangeness. A government official stood in the center of the screen, but didn't say a single word. The scrolling subtitles below were actually telling Carol to call a certain phone number. She hesitated for a moment, but finally dialed the number. Unexpectedly, the person who answered was none other than the official on TV. He greeted Carol warmly through the TV screen, then he apologized sincerely and said they meant no harm. They wouldn't hurt Carol. If Carol had any questions, she could call this number. They would provide her with anything they could. Carol hesitated again, then finally mustered up the courage to ask what was going on. The official on TV told her that a few months ago, an American observatory had accidentally received a signal from 600 light-years away. Later, analysis revealed that the signal was actually a strand of RNA code, so the US government gathered many biologists and successfully created this gene sequence. They then injected it into mice for experiments. Not long after, two of the mice suddenly froze completely still. the researcher in charge of the mice opened the cage to check if they were dead. Just then, the mice suddenly revived and bit the researcher. The next second, the researcher started convulsing violently. His colleagues quickly dragged him out of the laboratory, but before the two could get far, the researcher stopped convulsing. Seeing that their colleague seemed fine, the other person didn't pay any more attention to it, but by then, the researcher had already been assimilated and become a harmonizer with a hive mind. After that, she continued to assimilate others through various forms of close contact. Before long, the entire research base had become part of them. Everyone shared a single mind, acting in perfect unison even without any orders. Then the harmonizers used their own saliva to create a fast-spreading medium. They then dispersed it over the city using fighter jets. That was why most humans had now become part of them. And because all harmonizers shared a single mind, there was no distinction between leaders and ordinary members among them. Everyone was completely equal, with no hierarchy. They all worked toward a common goal. But Carol thought this was nothing more than the erasure of individual will. She anxiously asked how many people on Earth were still like her. The man told Carol that only 11 such people had been discovered so far. As for why they hadn't been assimilated, there was still no conclusion, but they believed they would soon find a way to get these people to join their collective. These words filled Carol with fear. She hung up the phone in a hurry and curled up on the sofa. Her heart was filled with fear, yet she was completely helpless. Unexpectedly, the harmonizer forcibly reconnected the call and apologized to her again. He also persuaded Carol not to worry. He claimed that after joining them, there would be no more sorrow or grief, only endless joy and contentment awaited her. Carol didn't want to hear any of this, so she could only roar at him to shut up. In this state of collapse, Carol didn't sleep a wink all night. This made her look extremely haggard, but she had to force herself to cheer up. To bury her girlfriend Helen, Carol chose to bury her in the yard. This place was filled with memories of their life together. At the same time, a woman covered in grime was flying a plane from another city toward Carol's location. Because all harmonizers shared a collective mind, anyone could possess masterful driving skills. The woman skillfully landed the plane, then immediately took a shower and changed her clothes. She appeared in front of Carol looking bright and beautiful. Faced with this unexpected woman, Carol was naturally full of vigilance, especially when the woman revealed her identity as a harmonizer. Carol had no desire to talk to her at all, but the woman didn't care at all. She introduced herself as Zojia, Carol's personal liaison. She advised Carol not to grieve too much, and to take care of herself. She suggested that Carol should at least take a rest before continuing to dig the grave. Carol cautiously questioned her, asking where she was monitoring herself from. Zojia didn't hide anything. She just pointed to the sky. She told Carol that there were military surveillance drones up there. Then Zojia handed her a bottle of water. She emphasized that the water had been produced before the incident. Carol could drink it without worry, but after taking the water, Carol poured it on the ground immediately. She used this action to show her resistance to the harmonizers. Zojia had to leave helplessly for the time being, to avoid further irritating Carol, but just then, Carol stopped her. She took out the novel she had written, and compared Zojia's appearance to the character in it. Carol was shocked to find that Zojia looked almost like the male protagonist in her novel. This discovery sent shockwaves through Carol's heart, because besides her and Helen, no one else knew that the original protagonist of her novel had actually been a woman. Carol was convinced that this was no coincidence. In response to her question, Zojia said that Helen had actually been fully assimilated before she died, so Helen's mind would live on forever in the collective consciousness. Naturally, they knew about this matter. Upon hearing this news, Carol suffered a mental breakdown on the spot. She shouted insults, calling them mental thieves. Just then, Zojia fell to the ground stiffly, then she began to convulse violently. Carol was at a loss for what to do. She thought of Helen's condition before she died, so she immediately rushed out of the house to find the nearby harmonizers to rescue Zojia. But she found that the other harmonizers had also fallen into a state of stupor and convulsions. Workers were hanging in midair, completely unattended. Machinery and equipment were left unmanned. Carol tried to wake these people up, but just like before, they didn't respond at all. Just as Carol was wondering what to do, the harmonizers regained consciousness once more. An old man told Carol that someone had already gone to take care of Zojia. Carol hurried back to her residence. Sure enough, Zojia was gone. After hesitating for a moment, she took the initiative to call the harmonizer's phone number. She hoped that Zojia would come back, so a few minutes later, Zojia appeared in front of her again. Carol asked anxiously what had happened just now. Zojia didn't hide anything either. She explained that intense emotional fluctuations in ordinary people could generate a powerful mental storm. This was fatal to them. Carol's anger and breakdown had spread through the harmonizer's mental network just now. This had ultimately caused the incident that just happened. Carol asked worriedly if anyone had died because of it. Although Zosha didn't give a verbal answer, her expression had already given the response. Carol probed cautiously. She asked how many people had died because of her anger. She started with dozens and kept increasing the number. Gradually, Carol didn't dare to speak anymore. She couldn't accept that her anger had caused so many deaths. Zosha quickly comforted her, telling Carol not to blame herself for this. Carol felt a little better, so she changed the subject and asked about the other non-assimilated people. Zosha said that 2 more non-assimilated people had been discovered, so including Carol, there were now 13 ordinary humans in total. They were scattered all over the world, and only 5 of them knew English. Carol hoped that she could meet them. Zosha said that she had to get their consent first, then she fell silent. Carol thought she had been affected by the mental storm again. She hurried to try to wake Zosha up. Fortunately, Zosha was just asking the other non-assimilated people. All 5 of them agreed to the meeting and were heading to the United States. Before long, 4 of them arrived at the airport at the same time. Carol greeted them warmly, just as she was wondering why the 5th person hadn't arrived yet. Air Force One, the U.S. President's special plane, unexpectedly appeared at the airport. There was no doubt that the 5th non-assimilated person was on board. He was a black man named Diabate. He was surrounded by beautiful harmonizer women. He was holding a nuclear launch briefcase, and his entire body was covered in designer brands. He was also wearing several diamond rings on his fingers. He looked exactly like a nouveau riche. The group of them went to a conference room. Carol demanded that all the harmonizers leave the room. She also forbade them from eavesdropping on their conversation. Before leaving, Zosha thoughtfully turned off the indoor surveillance cameras. Carol eagerly spoke up, stating that they must do something to save this ever-changing world, and restore everything to its original state. However, in the face of Carol's appeal, everyone present fell silent. Diabate was the first to break the silence. He thought that things weren't bad at all now, and the world didn't need to be saved. Once he spoke, the others followed suit. The Indian woman even turned the tables and questioned Carol. She asked if it was Carol who had thrown a tantrum and caused many harmonizers to fall into a stupor. Carol was stunned for a moment, then nodded and admitted it. The woman struggled to contain her anger and said that she had been in a car at that time. Because of Carol's anger, the car had lost control. She had almost died in the car crash, and the woman's grandfather had passed away forever because of it. It was the first time Carol had truly realized how much harm her anger had caused to others. She kept apologizing to the woman, but everything she said sounded so feeble and empty. The Indian woman thought that Carol was extreme and irritable. Even if she made a promise now, she would break it herself later. Carol had nothing to say, so she had to change the subject. She said that she had gathered everyone here to discuss a way to save the world together. They needed to rescue their loved ones from the harmonizers. But the Indian woman retorted once again,
"My child is still my child. Very much so."
The 2 of them argued again because of this. Fortunately, seeing that the situation was getting out of hand, Diabate stepped forward in time to smooth things over. He told Carol to calm down first. The situation wasn't as bad as she had imagined. The simplest example was that while they were talking, the whole world was developing in harmony. There were no crimes happening at all. The once intractable problems such as class solidification and racial discrimination had completely disappeared at this point. True equality for all and world peace had finally been achieved. Carol didn't know how to respond, and the others also stopped talking about the so-called topic of saving the world, and instead began to talk about their own lives. The Native American girl claimed that she really wanted to become a harmonizer.
"You don't think it sounds wonderful? You don't ask them what it's like?"
Carol certainly had never asked about this. The Indian woman said again that everyone else had already learned about the harmonizers in depth. Only Carol had always been stubbornly clinging to her own opinions. She had been making hasty judgments about things she didn't understand, and now she was even trying to tell them what to do. The Indian woman's words made Carol angry. Carol was convinced that she had been brainwashed by the harmonizers. In the end, the meeting ended on a sour note. Later, the harmonizers carefully prepared different kinds of food, according to their tastes and past experiences. Everyone except Carol ate with great relish. The harmonizers said that they strictly abided by the rule of not killing, so the food in front of them all came from animals that had died of natural causes. The elderly woman asked the harmonizers about their attitude toward insects. Zosha said that they would try to avoid them, and would never take the initiative to kill them. Then Diabate asked again what the harmonizers would do if they hunted animals. Zosha said calmly that they wouldn't stop Diabate and the others. They would only mourn for the animals. Then they would process the ingredients according to their instructions. Such a response made everyone believe that the harmonizers weren't harmful at all. Only Carol insisted that this was nothing but a lie told by the harmonizers. She wanted to prove to everyone that the harm caused by the harmonizers was far beyond imagination. So Carol questioned Zosha. She forced her to say how many people had died because of that global assimilation. For a moment, Zojia was lost for words. She hoped that Carol would skip this question, but Carol kept pressing her. In the end, Zojia gave an extremely precise number, 886,477,591. Carol thought she had succeeded with her plan, but the next second, the Indian woman told her that over 11 million people had died because of Carol's anger last time. She had never imagined it was such a terrifying number. She immediately ran to the side. Unable to face the truth, she also shouted insults, calling the others traitors to humanity. As she was leaving, Carol tripped and fell. Zojia and the others hurried forward to check on her. Unexpectedly, this made Carol lose control of her emotions again. All the harmonizers present fell to the ground and began convulsing. The Indian woman shouted at Carol, accusing her of killing her son. They didn't want to stay with such an emotionally unstable person any longer, so they left without hesitation. Diabate, who stayed behind, didn't want to leave either, but he had something he wanted to ask Carol. He hoped that Carol would give Zojia to him. Carol immediately guessed Diabate's dirty intentions. She shouted at him angrily on the spot. Diabate didn't fight back. Instead, he let Zojia choose who to go with. But this was an extremely difficult choice for Zojia. Both of them were subjects that needed to be observed. Carol chose to back out. Then, before long, as Carol boarded the plane and prepared to leave, she saw Diabate board Air Force One with Zojia. At this point, Carol was filled with mixed emotions. After a moment of silence, she finally realized something. She hurried off the plane and stood in front of Air Force One. In this way, Zojia returned to Carol's side once again. The two of them went back to Carol's residence. Zojia handed her a box. Inside were the letters from this period, and the parcels that hadn't been delivered due to the incident earlier. The so-called letters were just utility bills, but the parcel made Carol's expression complicated. It turned out to be a massage gun. She and Helen had wanted to buy one before, but they had to put the idea on hold because they couldn't afford it. She had never expected to see it at this point. Carol asked Zojia what was going on. Only then did she learn that it was a gift Helen had given her before she died. Upon hearing this answer, Carol felt even more grief-stricken. She forbade Zojia and the others from accessing Helen's memories ever again. She even told them to delete Helen's consciousness forever. With that said, Carol hung up the phone. Not long after, the doorbell suddenly rang. When Carol opened the door, she saw a delicious-looking meal. She asked Zojia what this was about. Zojia said that there was only a little canned food left in Carol's refrigerator, so she had asked a chef Carol had praised several years ago to prepare this lunch for her. Carol thought that Zojia had been prying into Helen's memories again. Otherwise, how would she have known there were only a few cans left in the fridge? Unexpectedly, Zojia said that the part-time cleaner had seen it when she went to clean the house. Carol didn't want to argue about this, so she threw the food out of the room. She would never eat food provided by the harmonizers. Carol went to the local supermarket to buy ingredients to cook for herself. But when she walked into the supermarket, she was instantly dumbfounded. The place was completely empty, with no ingredients at all. She called Zojia to question her. Zojia claimed that this was to make more efficient use of resources. After hearing Carol's request, Zojia promised to restock the supermarket immediately. Within less than half a minute, more than a dozen large trucks appeared outside the supermarket. The harmonizers in the town moved the ingredients into the supermarket in an orderly manner. It only took more than 10 minutes for the supermarket to be filled with all kinds of food. As Carol looked at all the food, her heart was filled with mixed emotions. That night, she was watching TV at home when everything suddenly went dark. Right after that, all the lights in the city went out. Before Carol could figure out what was happening, the power supply in the community was restored again. Zojia apologized slightly and said that it had just been a mistake. They were consolidating power resources to eliminate waste. Carol was curious about how the harmonizers lived in the dark. Could it be that they had night vision?
It's just that there's no crime to prevent, and we're not working at night, except for essential operations, water treatment, hospitals, things like that.
Carol hated this approach that only pursued efficiency and ignored comfort. She wished she could find a grenade to blow herself up and end everything. But shortly after she hung up the phone, Zojia actually showed up at her door with a grenade. This left Carol feeling speechless. Carol invited Zojia into the house. Through casual conversation, she learned about the harmonizer group in depth for the first time. For example, if Zojia got drunk, would all the other harmonizers get drunk too? Zojia told her that apart from herself, the other harmonizers would only sense that a member was drunk. They wouldn't show any signs of being drunk themselves, so Carol couldn't anesthetize all the harmonizers by getting a single individual drunk. The topic unconsciously turned back to assimilation again. Carol thought that this behavior seriously violated her autonomy. But Zojia explained that to them. It was like seeing someone drowning. and throwing them a lifebuoy. It was completely instinctive. It was precisely this attitude that annoyed Carol. Under the influence of alcohol, Carol kept complaining about the various behaviors of the harmonizers. She called them a bunch of mind controllers. Then she actually pulled the pin out of the grenade. Zojia promptly reminded Carol that it was a real grenade. She quickly grabbed it and threw it out the window. Thanks to Zoja's protection, Carol wasn't injured, but Zojia fell into a coma. Once again, Carol's willfulness had almost killed someone. She was filled with remorse, because Zojia was seriously injured. She couldn't serve as Carol's personal liaison for the time being, so Joe took her place temporarily. Carol asked him why they had given her a real grenade. Joe looked confused and replied, "Wasn't that what Carol herself asked for?" Upon hearing this answer, Carol had a vague guess about the harmonizers, so she pressed on and asked if she asked for a grenade again, would the harmonizers give her one again? Joe gave an affirmative answer without hesitation. After that, Carol kept testing them. She found that even if she asked for a nuclear bomb, these harmonizers would give it to her. Even though they knew she might do something harmful to the harmonizers, Joe would only use rational analysis to make Carol give up the idea on her own. Instead of stopping her by banning contact, Joe's explanation for this was,
"But we would move heaven and earth to make you happy, Carol."
At this point, Carol seemed to have thought of a way to deal with the harmonizers. After confirming that Zojia wasn't in danger of losing her life, Carol got ready to leave the hospital. At this point, she noticed that her own car was a bit shabby, so she set her sights on a police car parked nearby. After all, now that everyone shared a collective mind, these cars belonged to everyone, so Carol drove the police car away without any guilt. Along the way, all the harmonizers Carol encountered greeted her warmly, but such gestures only made Carol feel like everyone was watching her. Just then, the voice of a harmonizer came over the radio again. It told Carol that if she needed anything at all, she could tell them via the walkie-talkie. For example, if she wanted a nicer luxury car, or wanted someone to remove the alcohol detection device from her car. But Carol turned down all the offers. When she returned to her residence, she found many people cleaning up the debris from the explosion the night before. Carol questioned them about why they had entered her home without permission, only to be told that they had her permission to do so.
When you were riding with us in the ambulance, and we were applying a pressure bandage to Zoja's back, and we asked you if you'd like us to tidy up your house a little bit, and you sort of nodded absently.
Carol was lost for words and didn't know how to respond. She simply went inside the house alone. Carol looked at a whiteboard covered with writing, then she turned to another whiteboard and wrote down the characteristics of the harmonizers she had observed over time. There were 5 in total. First, they wanted to please her. Second, they wouldn't take the initiative to kill any living thing, even avoiding harming insects. Third, everyone was equal, even the mayor took part in manual labor. Fourth, they always wanted her to join them willingly. And fifth, they were unusually honest, not even knowing how to read between the lines. To prove her guesses, Carol called the harmonizer she had just talked to into the house and asked him a few questions. For example, what he thought about the novel she had written. Unexpectedly, the harmonizer spoke highly of her works. He claimed that one of his fellow harmonizers had once suffered from severe depression and wanted to end his life, but after reading Carol's novels, he had found a new reason to keep living. The harmonizer could even recite her works from memory. Then Carol asked what Helen had thought about her works. The harmonizer looked embarrassed. Not until Carol said that this was a special case, and that she wouldn't hold them accountable for prying into Helen's memories, did the harmonizer finally breathe a sigh of relief. But what Carol didn't expect was that Helen had only thought her works were average. She hadn't even been interested enough to finish reading a third of them. The reason she had supported Carol's publication in the first place was simply that she wanted Carol to have a career of her own. Such an answer was somewhat difficult for Carol to accept. She chased the harmonizer away, but this only made her more certain that these people couldn't read the room. Then Carol went to the hospital to visit Zojia. Zojia had already woken up from her coma by then. Taking the chance to apologize, Carol asked Zojia if there was any way to reverse the assimilation process. Zojia looked troubled and didn't answer, but Carol already had the answer in her mind. So she sneaked into the pharmacy and found a vial of sodium thiopental. It was also known as truth serum. Carol planned to use this to force the method of reversing assimilation out of Zojia, but to make sure the drug actually worked, she tested it on herself first. After taking the sodium thiopental, Carol felt her mind becoming sluggish. By the time she regained full consciousness, night had fallen. She quickly watched the video she had recorded during that time, and found that she had been sluggish at first. Then she had become somewhat manic. After that, she had begun to mutter to herself uncontrollably. She kept complaining that the harmonizers were all jerks. She was extremely annoyed by Zojia always following her around, but at the same time, Zojia's face was her type, making her unable to resist wanting to get close. Carol quickly turned off the video. She had confirmed that the truth serum worked, so the next day, Carol went to the hospital again, taking the chance to push Zojia out for a walk. She secretly mixed the sodium thiopental into Zoja's 4-drip. A moment later, Zojia started to look sluggish, seeing that the truth serum had taken effect. Carol immediately asked her how to reverse the assimilation process, but Zoja's will was stronger than she had expected. Zojia kept using negative responses to resist the urge to speak, and this brief delay allowed the surrounding harmonizers to sense that something was wrong with Zojia. Soon, dozens of harmonizers surrounded Carol. They tried to take Zojia away, but Carol actually handcuffed herself to Zojia. The harmonizers were afraid that approaching Carol rashly would trigger a mental storm, so they all kept their distance and didn't dare to come closer. Carol started pressuring Zojia again, forcing her to reveal the method of reversing assimilation. The other harmonizers were naturally not going to stand by and do nothing, so they chose to use words to intimidate Carol.
Carol, please. Carol, please. Carol, please.
The harmonizers couldn't lie, but they could choose to remain silent. Zojia suddenly fainted and was on the verge of death. Carol had to agree to cut the handcuffs first and let them save Zojia. Carol waited outside the ward and unknowingly fell into a deep sleep. Just then, everyone in the hospital seemed to receive the same order. They left the hospital in unison. When Carol woke up again, the place was completely empty. Even the critically injured Zojia had disappeared. She hurried to look around, only to find that all the harmonizers in the city were leaving the area. She tried to call the harmonizers to question them, but only a cold automated voice answered the phone. It was clear that Carol's previous actions had made the harmonizers realize she was extremely dangerous. Since they couldn't eliminate Carol, they chose to take the initiative to stay away and avoid contact with her. A sense of loss surged in Carol's heart, but she quickly cheered up again, firmly believing that she was very close to the truth. As long as she kept trying, she would be able to save those who had been assimilated. Carol used a video camera to record her progress. She also morally coerced the other 12 non-assimilated people in the name of humanity. She claimed that this was what they owed humanity. If they didn't help her, they would surely regret it bitterly after being assimilated. She hoped that they would realize their mistake soon and help her find a solution. Then Carol called the harmonizers and asked them to copy 12 copies of the contents of this memory card and add corresponding translations to the other 12 non-assimilated people. She threatened that if the harmonizers refused her, she would be angry again. Not long after, Carol saw a drone appear outside her door and take the memory card away. That night, Carol was suddenly woken up by a loud noise. Through the window, she saw 2 coyotes climb into her backyard. Fortunately, they didn't try to break down the door to attack her. They were just rummaging through the trash can for food. But even so, Carol couldn't eat or sleep in peace. She managed to scare the coyotes away by making all kinds of noises. Then Carol called the harmonizers again. She told them to turn on the city lights to deter those coyotes. The next day, Carol cleaned up the mess left by the coyotes. She also called the harmonizers to ask them to come and take care of the garbage. But the harmonizers only told Carol to put no more than 7.7 kilograms of garbage next to the trash can. They also told her to leave a distance of at least 60 centimeters, then they would arrange for someone to pick it up. Carol made a quick estimate. The garbage in her hands definitely weighed more than 7.7 kilograms, but she just wanted to see how the harmonizers would handle this situation, so she still put all the garbage in one bag. Not long after, a helicopter came and grabbed the garbage bag, but because the garbage was overweight, the drone finally couldn't bear the weight and crashed into a street lamp. The garbage inside scattered all over the ground, but the harmonizers didn't seem to react. They just let the garbage lie there. Carol had to throw it into the trash can manually, but in doing so, she found that there were only milk cartons in the trash can. This was obviously not normal. Carol checked many other trash cans. Without exception, there were only milk cartons of the same brand inside. She immediately went to this factory to investigate the reason. By this time, the factory was also completely deserted. There were only a lot of milk cartons still on the production line. Just then, Carol noticed that the liquid in the filling machine wasn't milk. It was an unknown yellow and slightly viscous liquid. Carol was certain that there was something wrong with those cartons of milk. Then she went to the factory warehouse to check the raw materials used to make this liquid. She found that they were actually bags of white crystals. Carol carried one of the bags home. After conducting various tests, she confirmed that the yellow liquid was made by dissolving these crystals in liquid. Carol recorded all her findings in front of the camera. For example, this yellow liquid smelled like olive oil. Its pH test showed a value of 7.1, and it didn't contain chlorine. Carol hoped that the others would also help with the investigation, to check if there were such production factories around them. Perhaps the way to reverse assimilation was hidden. Within them, Carol once again had the drone take the memory card away to make copies, but as soon as she got back inside, she found that the pack of coyotes had returned. Since there was no more food in the trash can, the coyotes started digging in the ground. They were on the verge of digging up Helen's body. Carol wouldn't stand by and do nothing. She hurried into the police car to get the gun, only to find that the weapon was locked inside. Carol tried for a long time but couldn't get it out. In a moment of crisis, she immediately turned on the siren and then crashed into her own fence. The coyotes scattered and fled immediately. Carol stayed in the police car. She waited until dawn, and only when she was sure the coyotes wouldn't come back, did she finally breathe a sigh of relief. Then Carol noticed that there was a handcuff key attached to the car key. She could finally unlock the half of the handcuff still on her wrist. Besides that, the unlock button was right next to the weapon. She had been too flustered the night before. She hadn't noticed this at all. Later, Carol drove to the quarry and picked up more than 20 thick stone slabs. Carol laid all of them over Helen's grave. This way, even if the pack of coyotes came again, they wouldn't be able to dig up Helen's grave. The exhausted Carol collapsed onto the sofa. She accidentally knocked over the bag of white crystals. It was then that she noticed there was a barcode on the bag. She took the bag to the supermarket, planning to use the scanner to check the information on it, but she found that it couldn't be identified. Then Carol remembered that there was a type of dog food in the supermarket that came in the same kind of bag. She immediately found that dog food, and discovered that even the barcodes were the same. Using the production address on the dog food package, Carol arrived at an abandoned factory building, perhaps because the harmonizers had left in such a hurry. They hadn't taken any of the food with them. Instead, they had stored it all in the cold storage room. Just then, Carol spotted something covered with a white cloth. She lifted the cloth, and her face immediately showed an expression of immense shock. She then fled the warehouse in a hurry and couldn't stop vomiting. That was right. Inside were human remains, all cut up and packaged. Carol thought she had uncovered the true nature of the harmonizers. She immediately took out her video camera and started filming everything she had seen in the factory building, especially those dismembered human remains. Later, Carol found a hidden room behind the cold storage. She suspected that this was where the harmonizers cut up and cooked the bodies, and then turned them into all kinds of white crystals. At this point, Carol couldn't wait to tell the others about this shocking discovery, but she quickly realized that once the harmonizers found out she knew their secret, they would most likely destroy the evidence. So this time, she didn't let the harmonizers copy and send the video to the other non-assimilated people. Instead, she decided to visit them in person to tell them the shocking news. Carol's first target was Diabate, who was in the casino city of Las Vegas. At the same time, Diabate seemed to still be immersed in the beautiful paradise created for him by the harmonizers. He was surrounded by countless beautiful women. No matter what cards the one-eyed bully across the table played, his hand was always worse than Diabate's. This feeling of being the center of the world made Diabate utterly addicted. The only flaw was that the one-eyed bully opposite him sometimes forgot his role. He even joined the others in congratulating Diabate. It really made Diabate break character a little. On the other side, Carol drove alone at full speed and finally arrived in Las Vegas. Everywhere she passed along the way, the harmonizers had all evacuated. Only various welcome billboards were left behind. This constant feeling of being watched made Carol extremely uncomfortable. It didn't take long for her to find out that Diabate was staying in the presidential suite of the most luxurious hotel in Las Vegas. She took the elevator to the top floor and found that Diabate had been waiting for her all along. It was clear that the harmonizers had already informed Diabate of her arrival in advance. Carol immediately said that she had important information to tell Diabate, but before she could finish her sentence,
Is this about them eating people?
What?
It is troubling.
It turned out that Diabate had known this all along. After all, if you asked them directly, the harmonizers wouldn't lie to them. Then, with Carol looking completely shocked, Diabate turned on the TV and let the harmonizers explain things to Carol themselves. The harmonizer representative told her that they didn't want to eat humans either, but according to the harmonizers' beliefs, they couldn't directly take any life. This included plants as well. Therefore, they couldn't harvest the crops in the rice fields either. They could only eat things that came to them naturally, like apples that fell from trees on their own. And now, there were over 7.5 billion harmonizers worldwide. Even though humanity had abundant food reserves before they arrived, those reserves would eventually run out, and over 100,000 people died from various accidents every single day. This was the only way they could alleviate the food shortage. That was why the harmonizers had built factories all over the world. They processed the available local food sources into that nutrient solution that looked like olive oil. The harmonizer representative assured Carol that they would never force her to eat this kind of food. and they would provide her with the freshest ingredients available. After the video ended, Carol asked Diabate when he had found out that the harmonizers ate humans. Diabate smiled helplessly, and said that you only had to observe carefully to notice that the harmonizers only drank milk, so he had asked them the reason behind it. Carol hadn't expected that Diabate had known all along but had kept it from her. Her expression clearly became unnatural. Just then, Carol heard another piece of news that shocked her. It turned out that everyone else had known for a long time too. It turned out that Diabate and the other 10 non-assimilated people had formed an alliance. Everyone was part of this group, except Carol and another man in Paraguay who refused to have contact with anyone. They held meetings every Tuesday and Friday. Most of them were online video conferences, with occasional offline dinners. Upon hearing that she had been excluded, Carol demanded that Diabate tell her why they had done this.
We took a vote. The majority felt your presence might prove disruptive.
Diabate didn't say it explicitly, but he hinted to Carol it was because she had only invited English-speaking people to the meeting at the very beginning. This made the other non-English speakers feel that they had been discriminated against, so from the very start, they had never had any good feelings toward Carol. Carol asked what the group had been discussing in their meetings. Was there not even a proposal similar to saving the world? Diabate said that there were naturally such topics. In fact, they were already doing something along those lines. The harmonizers had only told Carol that food supplies would run out in their previous video, but the actual situation was far worse. Diabate had asked the harmonizers repeatedly before they finally told him. In about 10 years, the harmonizers' food supplies would be completely exhausted, so the group was now researching how to carry out fully automated planting and harvesting. Having robots do all these tasks wouldn't violate the harmonizers' principles. As a writer, Carol obviously couldn't help in this area. Diabate comforted Carol, saying that this was neither her fault nor anyone else's. Carol didn't know how to respond, so she made an excuse to go to the bathroom to calm herself down. Diabate could see that Carol was feeling down, so after she left, he called the other members of the alliance. As for what was discussed and what the outcome was, it remained unknown for the time being. At this point, Carol felt that she had been isolated from the rest of the world. The companions who should have stood by her side had also betrayed her. An overwhelming sense of loss surged up in Carol's heart. She began to reflect on everything she had done before. When morning came the next day, Diabate personally cooked breakfast for Carol to soothe her sad mood. Carol said goodbye to Diabate and claimed that they might never see each other again. Before leaving, Carol said that instead of researching fully automated agriculture, Diabate and the others should change the harmonizers' mindset and make them pick apples themselves. Their current behavior of starving themselves voluntarily was simply insane and self-inflicted. She also didn't want to be transformed by these things and become one of their crazy members. Just then, Diabate told her that the harmonizers had actually figured out how to transform them. They had to design assimilation genes individually according to each person's unique DNA. This required taking stem cells from their bodies, and Diabate had clearly refused the harmonizers. The harmonizers had also promised not to take his stem cells. Carol was completely stunned by this news. She had never imagined that the way to prevent assimilation was so simple. She immediately used the equipment in Diabate's room to contact the harmonizers. She clearly stated that she wouldn't allow them to take her stem cells, and she would never agree to their assimilation. As soon as Carol finished speaking, the electronic screen outside displayed a reply. As usual, the harmonizers readily agreed to her request. At the same time, in a warehouse somewhere in Paraguay, a man was staring at the food delivered by the harmonizers from a distance, never getting close. He was the non-assimilated man who refused to have contact with the outside world. The man's name was Manuel, and he was the warehouse manager here. He had extremely strict standards for himself, and he was full of vigilance toward the harmonizers. Even though the food in his room had long run out, he still refused to accept their gifts. Instead, he opened his boss's warehouse and found a few cans of food. He left an IOU, promising to pay for them later. But today, the harmonizers had delivered something different. It was Carol's videos. Manuel discovered that there were other normal people like him in the outside world, so he decided to set off for the United States to join Carol in finding a way to save the world. He packed all his supplies and dug out his old car that hadn't been used for years. But shortly after leaving the warehouse, the car suddenly broke down and stalled. Just then, an old woman appeared not far away. She was Manuel's mother, but she had long been assimilated by the harmonizers. Manuel was full of vigilance toward her and forbade her from approaching him. Then he repaired the car by himself and set off again. After Carol returned to her residence, she looked at the vast, desolate, and empty town. A tinge of loss inevitably welled up in her heart. Humans are social animals. Prolonged loneliness almost drove Carol crazy. That night, she heard wolves howling in the town and unexpectedly howled along with them. After that, Carol seemed to have given up on herself somewhat. She no longer clung to the idea of uncovering the true nature of the harmonizers. Instead, she tried to find something to occupy herself. She called the harmonizers and asked for a bottle of drink. When they delivered it via drone, she then said that the drink she wanted was neither cold nor lukewarm, nor was it warm. It was a kind of special coldness. She hoped the harmonizers would try to meet her request next time. Later, Carol moved a lot of fireworks from the convenience store. No one knew what she intended to do with them. She wandered around every corner of the town like a roaming ghost. After all, the place had long been completely empty. She walked into the golf course that she had once only dared to look at from afar. She enjoyed this sport that used to be accessible only to the wealthy. But with the town completely deserted, the place had also been left unattended. Not only were the lawns overgrown with weeds, but many wild animals were wandering around everywhere, turning the place into something like a zoo. But Carol didn't mind. When she got tired of playing and was about to leave, she found that the police car she had been driving had broken down. Carol abandoned it without the slightest hesitation. This was a golf course. After all, there was no shortage of luxury cars here. She picked one at random and continued wandering aimlessly. Carol went to the town's art gallery. She took whichever piece of art caught her fancy back to her home. Suddenly, Carol remembered the fancy dinner she had eaten with Helen in the past, so she asked the harmonizers to prepare the same dinner at the hotel where they had dined before. The harmonizers replicated a nearly identical feast based on Helen's memories. Although Carol hated to admit it, the meal was really more delicious than anything she could make herself. Just as Carol was enjoying all of this, but Manuel's situation could be described as absolutely terrible. His car had run out of gas halfway, forcing him to continue on foot. The harmonizers appeared once again. They said they could offer Manuel assistance, but he remained as silent as a stone, not responding at all. The harmonizers told Manuel helplessly that if he needed anything, he should wave at the sky, and then they drove away. After walking for what felt like an eternity, Manuel finally found an abandoned car. There was still quite a bit of gasoline left in it. He filled a large bucket to the brim. Naturally, the strictly self-disciplined Manuel wouldn't just leave like that. He first left a banknote to pay for the gasoline, then took the bucket and departed. He drove through a town. The harmonizers there all smiled at him and stepped aside voluntarily, but their identical smiles only made Manuel more vigilant. He didn't trust those harmonizers, so he taught himself English on his way to the United States. When he was hungry, he fished in the rivers himself. When he was thirsty, he drank rainwater. He refused to rely on any help provided by the harmonizers. But as he was passing through a rainforest, the harmonizers stopped him. The leader spoke to him in Manuel's native language, telling him that this was the Darien Gap, which connected North and South America. There were no roads ahead that could accommodate vehicles at all. Moreover, it was extremely hot and humid, full of poisonous insects, ferocious beasts, and all kinds of bizarre and dangerous plants. For this reason, it was also known as the Death Zone. Out of concern for Manuel's safety, they hoped he would choose a different route. The harmonizers knew that Manuel was going to find Carol. They could fly Manuel there on an airplane. He would be able to arrive before dark, and his beloved car could be shipped to the United States with him as well. But Manuel didn't feel the slightest bit of joy after hearing this. He felt as if he had been completely seen through by these monsters. Manuel would never allow such a thing to happen. He immediately poured all the unused gasoline all over the car.
No pueden darme nada, porque todo lo que ustedes tienen es robado.
Then Manuel didn't hesitate for a moment. He set the car on fire. He didn't look back as he walked into the death zone, but it didn't take long for Manuel to experience the dangers of the death zone firsthand. It was a type of palm tree covered in sharp thorns. Unfortunately, Manuel slipped and lost his footing. It took Manuel a great deal of effort to break free, gritting his teeth against the intense pain. But in this hot and humid environment, the wound on his back quickly became infected and worsened. Manuel had to heat his machete until it glowed bright red. He used it to crudely treat the infected wound, but the power of the virgin rainforest far exceeded Manuel's expectations. His vision began to blur. The whole world seemed to be spinning around him. In the end, Manuel collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was a helicopter hovering directly above him. Carol gathered all the fireworks she had taken from the convenience store and set them off in the street. But just then, one of the firework tubes tipped over, and it pointed directly at Carol. But she didn't panic in the slightest. In fact, a faint expression of relief crossed her face. But unfortunately, the firework just grazed her head and hit the house behind her. Carol quickly fetched a water hose and put out the fire. After this incident, Carol seemed to accept the reality. The next day, she found a bucket of paint and wrote, Words on the street asking the harmonizers to come back. It didn't take long for Zojia, who had been away for so long, to appear at Carol's doorstep again. Carol ran over and hugged her tightly, then she burst into tears. She poured out all the pain she had endured during this time. With Zojia's return, more harmonizers also came back to the town. But after being apart for so long, Carol actually didn't know what to say when she met them again. She tried to ease the awkwardness with a game, but against the harmonizers, it was as if she was playing against 7 billion people around the world at the same time. So no matter what kind of game it was, she lost miserably without exception. The atmosphere became even more awkward. After enduring this awkwardness for a long time, Zojia suddenly said that it was time for her to go back, but Carol was extremely reluctant to let her go. She stopped Zojia and asked where she was staying now. Zojia said that the harmonizers had no concept of personal belongings. Everything was shared by everyone, and wherever there were harmonizers, she existed. Carol had to rephrase her question, and asked where the harmonizers in the town rested. She also hoped to go and take a look. Zojia took Carol to the gymnasium. There were many floor mats laid out here. Zojia told Carol that to save resources, they would gather in one place. Places like gymnasiums, shopping malls, and other large public facilities. They used centralized heating and power supply to save resources. Just then, a dog wandered over to Carol. She asked curiously if this dog was also a member of the harmonizers. Zojia gave a negative answer. She said that the dog was a pet of the harmonizers. After the assimilation, the harmonizers had set it free, but the dog refused to leave its owner, so it had been following them around ever since. The harmonizers also fed it regularly. At this point, Zojia suddenly invited Carol to experience their communal life. At first, Carol was clearly quite resistant. But thinking about what Diabate had said earlier, she decided to stay to learn more about the harmonizers. She lay on the floor of the gym, tossing and turning all night. Unable to fall asleep, Carol thought a lot, and her opinion of the harmonizers began to change. Early the next morning, Zojia took her back to her residence. The first thing Carol did when she got home was to open the whiteboard. She wrote down the characteristics of the harmonizers that she had observed recently. That afternoon, Carol asked Zojia to accompany her for a walk outside. The two of them walked to the edge of a cliff. They watched a train speeding toward them in the distance. Carol immediately exclaimed with emotion the sound of her favorite train whistle, because she thought it was the loneliest sound in the world. Upon hearing this, Zojia immediately contacted the companions on the train. The next second, the train let out a loud whistle. Carol finally asked a question that had been puzzling her for a long time. She wanted to know exactly how the harmonizers communicated with each other. Zojia didn't hold back and explained the principle in detail. It was a special form of electromagnetic induction. She also claimed that Carol actually possessed this ability too. It was just that Carol couldn't activate it on her own. It was the first time Carol had learned about this wonderful theory. She gained a deeper understanding of the harmonizers. Later, she took Zojia to get a massage. Carol asked curiously how the harmonizers were feeling now. She wanted to know if they felt relaxed because of the massage, but Zojia replied that the harmonizers still felt pain, because just now, more than 1,000 people had died all over the world. At the same time, more than 900 new lives had been born. But for her personally, the massage had made her feel very comfortable. Then the two of them went to the planetarium. Carol tried hard to identify the stars one by one through the astronomical telescope. Although Zojia couldn't share her vision, she was able to use her professional astronomical knowledge to roughly figure out which stars Carol was looking at. She specifically mentioned that in this direction, there was a planet called Kepler 22b. It was from this planet that humans had received the cosmic signal in the first place. Carol tried hard to see it clearly, but it was too far away from Earth. Zojia thoughtfully turned off the city lights. As the light pollution from the city disappeared, Carol finally managed to catch a faint glimpse of that planet. She was like an excited child. Only then did she realize that the atmosphere had become quite ambiguous. Carol quickly changed the subject and asked what was on Kepler 22b, but the harmonizers didn't know either. They were just very grateful to this planet, so they had built a huge matrix. They planned to send a signal of gratitude to Kepler 22b. After returning to her residence, Carol continued to record her findings. After these days of contact, she had already learned many characteristics of the harmonizers, but before Carol could finish writing, her marker pen suddenly ran out of ink. She instinctively asked the harmonizers to bring her a new one, but this request confused them. Carol had to lie and say that she had suddenly gotten inspired again. She told them she was working on the new book she had left unfinished before. The harmonizers immediately said that they would create an environment where she could write in peace. They promised not to disturb Carol unless it was absolutely necessary. In the days that followed, Carol continued to learn about the harmonizers in various ways. Suddenly, Zojia said she had a surprise for her. Then she took Carol to a restaurant. Carol was both surprised and excited when she saw the place, because this was exactly where she had started her writing career, but she remembered that this restaurant had closed down many years ago. She never imagined that the harmonizers would reopen it specially for her. Carol immediately began chattering away, telling Zojia endlessly about the hard times she had endured writing here. Because she had no resources, she could only write on one piece of paper at a time, and then she would use a big binder to put all the pages together at the end. What stuck most in her memory was that a waitress named Bree had given her a lot of support back then. Before Carol could finish her sentence, a waitress came over to refill her drink. Carol was shocked to find that it was none other than Bree herself, but amid her excitement, she suddenly thought of a problem. Bree had left this place many years ago to start a brand new life, but the harmonizers had forcibly brought her back here to work as a waitress again, all just to please Carol. Carol realized that this was the harmonizers' way of distracting her. They wanted her to indulge in this sense of happiness just like everyone else. Perhaps then she would muddle-headedly agree to be assimilated by the harmonizers. The more Carol thought about it, the angrier she became. She immediately left the restaurant, abandoning Zojia without a second thought. That night, Zojia came to Carol's house to apologize, but Carol didn't seem to care about what had happened during the day at all. She even invited Zojia to have a drink with her, but Carol put forward one condition. She hoped that from then on, Zojia would refer to herself as I instead of we. This strange request made Zojia feel a little awkward and unaccustomed at first, so she looked a little hesitant when she spoke. Then Carol brought up the incident with Bree that had happened earlier that day. She said that she would never give up on reversing the changes to the world, and the harmonizers knew this too, so the two sides decided to have an open and honest talk. Carol said that she really liked Zojia, but this whole thing was nothing but a great disaster to her. All of humanity was controlled by a bunch of lunatics. They couldn't even pick apples and were just waiting to starve to death slowly. So no matter what, she was going to restore the world to its original state, even if it meant that Zojia would leave her because of it. But just then, Zojia suddenly hugged Carol. She said that they had always loved her. After that night, Carol gained a deeper understanding of the harmonizers. Later, she took out the sequel to her novel. She claimed it was a reward for the harmonizers. While preparing breakfast, Carol suddenly asked Zojia what her favorite food was. To her surprise, this time Zojia spoke fluently in the first person, telling stories of her childhood and that unforgettable mango ice cream. At this point, she seemed to have regained her normal self. Even Carol, who was standing beside her, couldn't help but show a look of slight surprise. But just then, Zojia seemed to suddenly receive some kind of signal. She first fell into a brief daze, then she reverted to that indifferent state again. She also said that guests would be arriving soon. At the same time, in a hospital somewhere in Panama, Manuel finally woke up from his coma. The first thing he did was take a medical worker hostage. Then he demanded that they prepare an ambulance for him and a bill for this rescue. Although he had no money at the moment, he wrote an IOU on the bill. He said that he would definitely pay the money back later. Then he drove the ambulance away from the hospital quickly, and continued heading toward the small town where Carol lived. Carol learned from Zojia that Manuel was heading her way. She also monitored Manuel's journey remotely via satellite. She asked Zojia for information about Manuel, but she found out that because he refused to have any contact with the harmonizers, they knew almost nothing about him either. They could only guess that his trip here was influenced by the videos Carol had sent out earlier. Although Zojia didn't say it explicitly, she still hinted that she didn't want Carol to meet him. But Carol thought that the man had traveled all this way because he trusted her. Out of courtesy, she should at least meet him.
I'll just hear him out and send him on his way.
This answer somewhat reassured the harmonizers. Seeing that Zojia still had concerns, Carol asked if Manuel had done anything dangerous along the way. In the end, Zojia didn't tell her about what had happened at the hospital. Before long, Manuel finally arrived at the town where Carol lived. He followed the map to Carol's house. After learning along the way, Manuel's English had improved significantly. He could already hold some basic daily conversations. He introduced himself to Carol in English, stating that he had come to save humanity, but Carol's first reaction was to tell him to take off the machete hanging at his waist. Only after seeing Manuel remove his weapon did Carol invite him inside. But Manuel said he hoped Carol would talk to him in the ambulance. Naturally, Carol refused to be alone with a stranger in such a confined space. She refused immediately, and seeing that Manuel didn't respond, she thought he didn't understand English and took out her phone's translation app. Unexpectedly, Manuel got flustered. He thought the harmonizers were using the phone to eavesdrop on them, so he snatched Carol's phone away in one swift motion. Carol tried to explain to Manuel that without her permission, the harmonizers wouldn't eavesdrop on them. Besides, the phone was in airplane mode and not connected to any external network. But Manuel wouldn't listen. He immediately threw Carol's phone into the sewer. At this point, Carol was truly enraged. She thought Manuel was an unreasonable lunatic. she told him to go back to where he came from. With that said, she slammed the door shut. Manuel froze. He hadn't expected her to react like this. After standing motionless for a long time, Manuel finally decided to compromise. He took the machete out of the car. It took him a great deal of effort to retrieve the phone from the sewer. Then he went to Carol's door and apologized. He said she could have her phone back, but they would have to talk somewhere else. He also asked for an umbrella. After both sides compromised, they went to an open area. Manuel glanced around briefly, then opened the umbrella. He told Carol to stand under it too. This confused her greatly. Manuel explained that those monsters had been watching them from the sky the entire time. They could even read their lips to understand their conversation. This was the only way to prevent their secrets from being leaked. But after hearing this, Carol brought up the idea of talking at her house again. She assured him there were absolutely no bugs there, but Manuel thought Carol had been deceived by them. The two of them argued about this once more. Carol told Manuel about her experiences and discoveries over the past few days. She wanted to prove that the harmonizers meant them no harm, but Manuel countered with a question.
Why they come back?
Carol had no answer to this question. She had clearly realized that she and Manuel weren't the same, so she simply resorted to tough words. She told him to go back if he wasn't willing to come inside. In the end, Manuel compromised once again. But once he went inside, he didn't say a word and kept searching for something. Carol had wanted to mock him for being overly paranoid. Just then, Manuel pried an electronic device out of the liquor cabinet. At this point, even Carol lost her composure. She immediately picked up the phone and demanded that the harmonizers tell her what the device was. Zojia first apologized to her solemnly. Then she said that it wasn't installed by them. But many years ago, when Carol froze her eggs and was preparing for IVF, Helen installed it to prevent her from drinking too much. It only kept a record when the liquor cabinet was opened, and had no eavesdropping function at all. The mention of Helen stirred up some unpleasant memories for Carol. She had no desire to keep talking to Manuel about saving the world. She took him to the neighbor's house next door, and told him to come back to see her tomorrow. But Manuel was a man of principle, and would never occupy someone else's house without permission. He insisted on staying at Carol's house. It wasn't until she threatened him again that Manuel agreed to stay there. After Carol left, Manuel thought for a moment, then picked up the phone and dialed the number Carol had used earlier. He demanded to meet the person who had been in contact with Carol before. So in the middle of the night, when Carol got up to use the bathroom, she noticed that Zojia's car was parked outside Manuel's temporary residence. She realized something was wrong and rushed into the room at once. She finally breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that the two of them were just having a normal conversation. Then Carol demanded that Zojia be taken away immediately. She forbade Manuel from having any more contact with her. It was clear that Carol had completely fallen in love with Zojia. After taking Zojia back to her house, Carol hoped that she wouldn't go near Manuel again, but her request was rejected by Zojia.
I know this is hard to understand, but we love him the same as we love you.
Carol simply couldn't accept this. Clearly, her relationship with Zojia was much closer. Just as Carol was about to issue an order forbidding Zojia from approaching Manuel, Zojia suddenly fell to the ground and her whole body began to convulse. Carol knew this situation all too well. She realized that Manuel must be up to something. Carol rushed into the neighbor's house in a flash. She saw Manuel interrogating a harmonizer, just like what Carol had done before. Manuel ignored her attempts to stop him completely. After a thorough check, he suddenly rushed out of the room and retrieved a notebook from the ambulance. It contained a mysterious channel signal he had accidentally discovered while searching for other survivors, so he had made a special note of it. Manuel tried tuning the radio to that specific channel. To his surprise, the harmonizer returned to normal in an instant. Manuel felt as if he had stumbled upon an important clue. He flew into a rage at the harmonizer again, and the latter fell into convulsions once more. Manuel played the corresponding radio broadcast while trying to awaken the harmonizer's consciousness to break free from the control, but Carol didn't dare to let him continue the experiment, so she rushed back to her residence at once. Carol stopped Manuel's experiment by force. After the harmonizer recovered, just like how they had isolated Carol before, the harmonizers evacuated the town once again, only this time, the one being isolated was Manuel. Even Carol drove out of the town. In the days that followed, Carol completely immersed herself in her relationship with Zojia, even though she knew that what she was facing was the collective will of 7 billion people around the world. Carol didn't care. Meanwhile, Manuel stayed in the town and self-studied English, flipping through various biological materials to find ways to reverse assimilation, until a few days later, a dramatic twist occurred. Carol accidentally found out that the harmonizers hadn't given up on assimilating her, they had even located her previously frozen eggs, and within 1 to 3 months, they could reverse-induce stem cells from them, to allow her to truly join the harmonizers. They also said that not long ago, another non-assimilated person had taken the initiative to join them, to experience that boundless joy. At this point, Carol truly panicked. She would never accept such an outcome, so Carol flew a helicopter back to the town, carrying a container with her. She teamed up with Manuel once again to fight side by side. Inside the container was a nuclear bomb. If there was truly no way to reverse the assimilation, she wouldn't just sit idly by and wait for her fate, and that is where the film ends. Pluribus Season 1 premiered this November. It was created by Vince Gilligan, the mastermind behind Asterisk, Breaking Bad Asterisk and Better Call Saul. Therefore, in the series, you can not only see many familiar faces, but also spot numerous Easter eggs from these two shows. For example, the name of the town is Albuquerque. The film intensely explores the conflict between the collective and the individual in a rather extreme way. It asks whether we should abandon individual will for the sake of so-called efficiency. However, the female lead Carol is a staunch advocate of individual will. Therefore, you can see the beauty of human nature in her, as well as the selfish side of human nature. I wonder what opinions all of you viewers have. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section. If you like my channel, please like and subscribe.